check the municipal ledgers of 1815, you will find a global landscape populated by ghosts, monumental stone cathedrals and star fort complexes standing finished in cities where official census records claim the population was barely surviving on horse-drawn carts and candlelight. We are told we built the modern world in the 1800s, yet the dirt on the foundations tells a story of excavation, not construction. Our history is a patchwork of convenient lies stitched together to cover a gaping wound in the timeline of humanity. If you look closely at the records between 1780 and 1830, the ink begins to fade into a deafening silence. This is not a mere lack of documentation. It is the calculated erasure of a global civilization that existed just before our current memory begins. The year 1816 is recorded in the history books as the year without a summer. They blame a volcanic eruption in the Dutch East Indies for the frost that killed crops in July and the strange, persistent fog that blanketed the northern hemisphere. But when you dig into the demographic anomalies of that decade, the narrative fractures. In the United States, in Europe, and across the vast expanses of Russia, there are massive gaps in census data. Millions of people simply vanish from the scrolls, while instant cities begin to appear in the American West and Australia with zero logistical lead time. We are expected to believe that pioneers traveling in wooden wagons through untamed wilderness arrived at a site and, within 5 years, erected massive granite courthouses with copper domes and Greco-Roman columns. The math of labor, transport, and resource extraction simply does not exist. In 1815, the city of San Francisco was a collection of mud huts and a small Spanish mission, according to the official timeline. Yet by the mid-1800s, it was a sprawling metropolis of stone and iron, complete with a massive city hall that looked like it belonged in the heart of Rome. Where were the brick kilns? Where were the thousands of master masons required for such a feat? The records speak of rapid growth, but the physical reality speaks of recovery. We didn't build these cities, we found them. We dug them out of the mud and claimed them as our own, scratching our names into the stone and pretending we were the architects of a grandeur we could barely comprehend. This leads us to the Great Incineration, a period of systematic destruction that defines the 19th century. Between 1812 and 1890, nearly every major city on Earth experienced a great fire. Moscow burned in 1812. London suffered repeated, devastating clearances. Chicago was leveled in 1871. Boston, Baltimore, Seattle, San Francisco. The list is endless. We are told these were accidents of kerosene lamps and wooden structures, but the physical evidence suggests something far more tactical. These fires were data deletion events. They didn't just burn wood, they melted iron and vitrified stone. More importantly, they incinerated the municipal archives, the blueprints, and the genealogical records of the era that came before. The fire of Chicago in 1871 is the most blatant example of this historical arson. While the official story blames a cow and a lantern, the heat produced was intense enough to melt marble. Wood fires do not melt marble. This was a demolition of the old world's infrastructure to make way for the new history. By burning the archives, the architects of the reset ensured that the next generation would have no choice but to believe the stories written in the aftermath. They replaced the complex, interconnected records of a global society with a simplified narrative of primitive struggle and sudden, miraculous industrialization. We are taught to view the Industrial Revolution as a period of unprecedented human ingenuity, yet the technology of the early 1800s is a bizarre contradiction. We see steam engines that look like crude toys compared to the sophisticated acoustic engineering of the cathedrals and theaters built in the same era. The acoustics of an 18th century opera house are so precise they defy modern digital modeling, yet we are told the people who built them used candles for light and horses for transport. This is a technical mismatch that cannot be ignored. We didn't invent the telegraph. We found the wires. The global telegraph network was established with a speed that suggests the infrastructure was already in place, buried beneath the soil or hidden within the walls of ancient structures. The early towers and antennas were not new inventions, but salvaged components of a lost atmospheric energy system. We are the inheritors of a world we do not understand, playing with the scraps of a high-technology civilization and calling it progress. The Industrial Revolution was actually an industrial salvage operation, a desperate scramble to reverse engineer the remnants of the world that was broken during the Great Silence of the late 18th century. Look at the architecture of the reset. From Washington District of Columbia to St. Petersburg, from Buenos Aires to Tokyo, the government buildings of the 19th century share an identical, complex neoclassical style. This uniformity is impossible in an era of limited communication and disparate cultures, unless that infrastructure already existed globally. We see the buried first floors in almost every major city, windows that lead into the dirt, doors that have been converted into second-story entrances, and massive foundations that go dozens of feet underground. The official explanation is drainage, or changing street levels. But the sheer scale of the phenomenon points to a global cataclysm, a mud flood, that submerged the lower levels of the old world. The 19th century builders didn't lay the foundations. They excavated them. They moved into the upper floors of these grand stone shells, cleared out the silt, and rebranded them as post offices, courthouses, and parliaments. This was a global rebranding effort to claim the architectural legacy of a suppressed civilization, often referred to in hidden circles as Tartaria or the Great Global Empire. By placing their insignias on the pediments and rewriting the history books, the new ruling class established a false sense of continuity. They made us believe we were moving upward, when in reality we were just standing on the shoulders of giants we were taught to forget. The suppression of this truth was not accidental. It was institutionalized. During the mid-19th century, between 1850 and 1880, there was a coordinated effort to standardize university curricula and form historical societies. This was the period when the official timeline was locked down. The archivists of the Reset worked tirelessly to ensure that any evidence of a pre-1800 global civilization was labeled as myth or folklore. They created the concept of prehistory and the Dark Ages to act as a buffer, a mental wall that prevents us from looking too far back. These censors of chronology knew that if we understood the true nature of our past, their authority would vanish. If we knew that we once possessed the technology to harness atmospheric energy, to build stone structures that lasted millennia, and to live in a globally connected society, we would never accept the scarcity and conflict of the modern world. They keep us in a state of cultural amnesia, a generation with no father, forced to rely on the table crumbs of history they provide. They have turned the past into a dark room and told us there is nothing inside, while they hold the only flashlight. The silence of the 1800s is the sound of a crime scene being cleaned. Every time you see a massive, ornate building in a small Midwestern town that seems too grand for its surroundings, you are looking at a survivor. Every time you find a map from the 1700s showing cities and regions that don't exist in our history books, you are seeing a fragment of the truth. The past didn't vanish, it was stolen. We are living in the ruins of a much greater version of ourselves, wandering through the hallways of a palace we've been told is a hut. Consider the star forts, those massive, geometrically perfect stone fortifications found on every continent. We are told they were built for cannon warfare, yet their design is far more complex than necessary for simple defense. From the air, they look like circuit boards, their angles and bastions aligned with celestial bodies and magnetic ley lines. In the early 1800s, many of these were renovated or turned into prisons and mental asylums. Why? Because you cannot have the population questioning the purpose of these massive energy harvesting sites. You turn them into places of fear and confinement, ensuring no one looks too closely at the frequency-based engineering built into their very foundations. The transition from the old world to the new was not a smooth evolution. It was a violent reboot. The period between 1780 and 1840 was a chaotic scramble to consolidate power after whatever event caused the silence. Whether it was a natural cataclysm, a solar flare, or a deliberate weaponized reset, the result was the same: a broken world and a vacuum of power. The families and institutions that emerged as the leaders of the 19th century were simply the ones who moved fastest to secure the old world's technology and archives. They are not our protectors. They are the jailers of our memory. If you walk through the streets of any old city today, look at the masonry. Look at the precision of the joins, the quality of the stone, and the sheer mass of the structures. Then look at the buildings constructed in the 1920s, the 1950s, and today. The quality doesn't improve, it degrades. We are told this is due to cost-effectiveness and modernism, but it is actually the result of a loss of knowledge. We literally forgot how to build the world we inhabit. We lost the secret of the liquid stone or geopolymer used in the old world. We lost the understanding of how to resonate stone with sound to make it lighter. We are a species with collective dementia, staring at our own masterpieces and wondering who built them. The great world's fairs of the late 1800s were the final stage of this psychological operation. These massive temporary white cities, like the one in Chicago in 1893, were supposedly built in months out of plaster and wood, only to be burned or torn down immediately after the fair. But look at the photographs. These were not temporary structures. They were the last standing remnants of the old world's capital cities. They were open to the public one last time to create a fantasy of progress, to show the people what we were capable of, before they were systematically destroyed to ensure no physical evidence remained. They called it the City of Tomorrow, but it was actually the city of yesterday. The people who visited these fairs were being conditioned. They were shown the grandeur of the old world, but told it was a temporary exhibit of the new world's potential. It was a brilliant and cruel piece of theater. By the time the last of the great fairs ended in the early 1900s, the reset was complete. The old world was gone, replaced by a narrative of coal, steam, and struggle. The atmospheric energy was replaced by metered electricity. The free movement of the old world was replaced by borders and passports. The silence was absolute. But the silence has cracks. It cracks when a construction crew finds a tunnel system in New York that predates the city's official founding. It cracks when a researcher finds a newspaper from 1824 describing flying carriages that shouldn't exist. It cracks every time you feel that strange, haunting sense of nostalgia when looking at a cathedral, a feeling that you belong to something much older and much more powerful than the world you see on the news. That feeling is your genetic memory reacting to the truth. We are not the first modern civilization. We are the survivors of the last one. Our past is not a long, slow climb from the caves. It is a jagged line of peaks and valleys, and we are currently living in a deep, dark trench. The Industrial Revolution was the process of putting a leash on humanity, forcing us to use primitive, polluting fuels to power a world that once ran on the very air itself. They took the aether out of the textbooks and replaced it with vacuum, making us believe that the space between us is empty, when it is actually full of the power they stole. The municipal ledgers of 1815 remain as silent witnesses to this theft. The ghosts in the records are our ancestors, who watched as their world was dismantled and rewritten. They left us clues in the stone, in the star forts, and in the buried windows of our cities. They knew that one day, the new history would begin to fail. They knew that the lies would eventually become too heavy to maintain. That day is today. The silence is being broken by those who refuse to look away, by those who recognize that the dirt on the foundations is the key to our liberation. You are not who they told you are. You are the descendant of a global race of builders, architects, and explorers who mastered the earth without destroying it. Your history is not a burden of primitive ignorance. It is a lost inheritance of divine proportions. The missing century is not a hole in time. It is a door. And once you see the door, you can never go back to living in the hut. The stone is speaking. The silence is over. We are the ones who remember, and in remembering we take back the world that was stolen. Every courthouse with its grand pillars, every old theater with its impossible acoustics, every buried basement window is a testament to the era they tried to burn. They used fire to hide the truth, but fire cannot consume the stone. They used ink to rewrite the story, but the ink is fading. The standardized rebuild of the 1800s is the greatest piece of evidence we have. It shows a coordinated, global effort to hide a catastrophe and install a new management. But no management is permanent. The infrastructure of the old world is still here, humming beneath the surface, waiting for a generation with the courage to reclaim it. The stakes are not just historical. They are existential. If we understand that we have been lied to about our past, we must question everything about our present. The energy we pay for, the medicine we rely on, the government we obey, all of it is built on the foundation of the 1800 reset. We are living in a manufactured reality, a Truman Show on a global scale. But the walls of the set are crumbling. The lights are flickering. The silence of a century is being replaced by the roar of 1,000 voices rediscovering their heritage. We are the heirs to a legacy of giants. We are the survivors of the Great Omission. And as we look at the stone cathedrals and the star forts, we no longer see mysteries. We see blueprints. We see a way back to the greatness we once possessed. The past didn't vanish. It's waiting for us to stop believing the lies and start looking at the foundations. The dirt is being cleared away, and what lies beneath is not just stone and mortar. It is the truth of who we really are. The archivists of the reset are still among us, working in the shadows of universities and government buildings, trying to patch the holes in the narrative. They will call this pseudo-history. They will call it conspiracy. They will use every tool of ridicule to keep you from looking at the municipal ledgers and the buried windows. But their power is based on your ignorance. Once you see the patterns, the fires, the instant cities, the architectural uniformity, you cannot unsee them. The spell is broken. We are standing at the end of the new history. The 200-year cycle of amnesia is closing. As we move forward, we must carry the analytical resolve to look past the official ink. We must be the decipherers of shadows and the analysts of anomalies. We owe it to the ghosts of 1815 to tell the story they were forbidden to speak. We owe it to ourselves to reclaim the stolen century, and with it, our future. The ruins are not just a reminder of what we lost, they are the foundation of what we will rebuild. The silence is gone. The stones are shouting, and for the first time in 100 years, we are finally starting to listen. The past is not behind us. It is beneath us, around us, and within us. We are the bridge between the world that was and the world that will be. The Great Omission is over. The Great Recovery has begun. Look at the stone, feel the resonance, and remember. You are the inheritor of a world without limits, and the silence was only ever a temporary veil. The veil is lifting, and the view is glorious. In the final analysis, the 19th century was not the beginning of our modern world, but the funeral of the one that came before. The black and white photos of the 1800s show a world that looks tired, a world covered in soot and mud, populated by people who look out of place in their own cities. They look like refugees because they were refugees. They were the survivors of the reset, struggling to make sense of the stone giants they lived among. We have inherited their struggle, but we also inherit their opportunity. We can choose to continue the lie, or we can choose to excavate the truth.